All right, so earlier this week we've talked about just what is graphic design, and then we broke it down into the types of images that you would see in graphic design. And today we're going to talk about elements of graphic design. And so you will need your note guide just like normal. Open it up, follow along with the PowerPoint, and then you'll submit the note guide to Google Classroom for credit when you're done. All right, so we're talking about elements of design, okay? And so when we talk about that, we're saying that graphic design has two main ideas. Elements of graphic design, which are the individual pieces of an image, and then principles of graphic design, which is the general guidelines for putting the pieces together in a way that conveys meaning and or is appealing, okay? So elements make up principles. And so you'll see that on the next slide here. It says, elements would be the various ingredients in a kitchen, while the principles would kind of follow the role of the recipe. So you have to have them both. They work together, but elements make up the whole entire recipe, which is, so elements make up principles. And so we're going to look at 8 different elements, and later on we'll talk about the principles. So there are 8. We're talking about color, line, shape, form, value, space, texture, and typography. These are the elements that refer to the objects that are combined to create a graphic. So a graphic can have all of these elements, or it might only have 1 or 2 of them. And so we're going to go further into detail on the next few slides. So the first one we're going to talk about is color, okay? So we see color in the wavelengths of the visual spectrum. So everything that we see color-wise falls into red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. So they all are on that spectrum. And color's kind of weird, okay? So color, the color of an object is determined by what it reflects and what it absorbs. So an example of that would be that a red fire truck actually absorbs all wavelengths except red, because red is the color that's reflected. It's kind of funny, but that's kind of how color works. Different colors belong to different color groups, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. And colors can actually give off different cultural meanings. They can give you different feelings, or they can even give you different psychological impacts. So when we talk about color groups, we're talking primary, secondary, tertiary, and complementary. We are going to talk more in detail about these later, but you can see here kind of what makes up each of those color groups. The next element are lines, okay? And so a line is going to be a path between 2 points, right? So you know what a line is. It creates edges and boundaries of 2 objects. They can be long, thin, fat, ragged. They can also be made with text, which would mean that you created lines out of your text. Lines can create patterns, textures, or shadows. And lines can also be implied, meaning that whatever you created, there's lines within it that you maybe not necessarily are defined, but they are there. So you can see kind of an example of lines on the picture here. And the next element, they're shapes. And so shapes are when lines connect and enclose a space that creates a shape. And so you can see that over here that you've created shapes using what looks like maybe a circle and maybe a triangle. Shapes can be geometric, circles, squares, triangles, etc., or they can be organic, which would be more like natural or irregular shapes. And shapes must reflect the message being communicated. The next element is form. So shapes that seem to have 3 dimensions have form. So we're almost talking 3D here. So form is, you could see it in this example on the ketchup bottle. We used, they used actual tomatoes to create the image that it looks like it's 3D. Form is created from differences in shading, texture, or tone. And design objects can be 3-dimensional, meaning like packaging. So that can also take form. And then you have value, and value is actually going to be specifically like the qualities of the colors that you're using, like hues. And so that's the name of a color in its pure form, so just the way that it is, or it can have a value, which is the degree of darkness or lightness of a color, and then intensity. So colors can be bright or dull, and you can see a really good example of how that red is really bright, right? It catches your eyes, and the whole thing is bright. So the intensities, values, and hues are all in play here on this poster that you see. Another element is space, and so this is going to be the empty or open areas around or in a design. And so you'll see this on the Jeep. They've used a lot of open space here to give you the, if you read it, it says, if there's no planet, where will you drive? So Jeep is doing, it's almost like a green, like a go green recycle deal. But it's using the space to imply to you that there will be nothing for you if you don't take care of the earth, right? And so they're using space in a emphasis type of way on this poster. So negative space is going to be the space around objects, and positive space is they're the images or objects in the composition. So you'll have a foreground, which is space near the front, and you can have a background, which is the space in the back. And use space and relationships to create a sense of depth. Texture is another element, and so texture is just the way that something feels, and you can have different ones. They can be rough, smooth, shiny, dull, hard, or soft. You could have actual versus implied texture, meaning that you can actually feel it, or it's implied. Like in the picture, it's implied that there's texture there. I can't actually feel it. And then texture can be used to create variety and depth. And then you have typography, which is kind of neat itself. It's a design element unique to graphic design. So when you use typography, it's using words to create shape, texture, points, and lines. And it doesn't have to necessarily be words. It can be letters or it can be numbers, whatever you want it to be, but they communicate a verbal message. And so it says font choice can create distinct feelings and mood. So I'll give you examples of that later when we talk specifically about typography, but font can make you feel a certain way. Like if I use all caps, it makes me think you're yelling at me, right? Typing and typography is very important to your overall design of your graphic. Okay, and so on your note guide, you're going to see a section for 3 review questions. And go back through the PowerPoint if you need to. This first question says, what color group does the color to the right belong to? And so you can go back to the color slides if you need to and think about what color red belongs to. Your next question is, which elements of design is the picture to the right utilizing? So it can be more than one. Think about which elements we just talked about and how this picture reflects any of those. And your last question is, the image to the right is not a giraffe, but it's the outline of giraffe using what types of shapes? So we talked about specific shapes, could be geometric or organic. So which ones are being used here, geometric or organic? And so once you answer these 3 questions, here they are again, you're good to go and you can submit your note guide on Google Classroom.